long as the orders are...
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Topical Talkology. Well, today we've just had a brief chat before this podcast as to what we were going to cover today, and we really want to talk about the influencer, more importantly, the emergence of the scientific influencer, who seems to have reared its head and obviously, I mean, we'll be talking about how they were going to position themselves and to come across as the experts and what is the ulterior motive behind that. So I'd like to welcome Theo and Alexei to this podcast. Morning both.
Good morning, Andy. How are you?
Yes, well, I'm all good. It's Saturday morning.
Good morning, Theo.
Morning. So let's get started on this. The influencer, the scientific influence, and I'll probably throw this into Theo's lap to start off with, because he's got a background in that area. Ish.
But so
having been a doctor, it's all about science.
Is it all about the science? That's the thing. Is it all about the science?
Well, clearly not. It's about helping people, isn't it? You see, the point is, number one, do no harm as a doctor. Number two, help people and use science to do that if necessary. But of course, any doctor knows that what's the bedside manner? Bedside manner is exactly that. It's the human aspect, and it's well known, for instance, that surgeons, a lot of them have zero bedside manner because they are basically the people who played rugby and tend to just like the technical aspects. And then of course there's the laboratory researchers who have even less bedside manner, who some of them actually actively dislike patients and just want to on the sides. Hang on. So that's the background of professors who are on TV now. Okay.
Yeah, just to. So I know you're in your flow there, but I just need to butt in because I want to sort of rebut some of what you said in some ways. Because the thing is, when you're a doctor, for example, and you're dealing with death on a regular basis, there's a human aspect of their behavior that almost has to detach themselves from the feeling, because facts have no feelings, particularly when it comes to science. It's how you respond to those facts with feeling. But having been a doctor and having to deal with people, it's very hard to get personally close to them, particularly if you're working A&E and things like this, because you normally have to detach yourself from the emotion to be able to apply the rational and the logic. Do you not think?
Well, that's exactly why it's hard to find a really good doctor, because you're professional whilst you're being human at the same time. And some people do have difficulty with that, for sure.
I can give you an example. When my father 3 years ago was in hospital in the ICU unit, and his whole body collapsed. So from the top, so he was in a coma, he had a heart attack, he was on a ventilator, his kidneys failed, you name it, everything went wrong, and he was literally wired in, plugged in. And I spoke to this doctor, and it was actually quite something I will never forget, because it was actually rare. I think there's a fine line between detaching yourself to be able to cope with these occurrences on a daily basis in your profession as a doctor, especially in the A&E, ICU unit especially. However, you need to have a certain level of emotional intelligence and a certain level of empathy in the way you communicate. You may be desensitized inside, but you still need to remember that you are speaking to human beings that are either just about to lose their loved one or on the edge, or there needs to be explained in very simple terms, because all the emotions and the...
I'm not doubting that at all for a second.
And he was brilliant. He was brilliant. I never had somebody speak to me with such respect. He was absolutely the most beautiful communicator I've ever dealt with. But I think the point is rare. But going back to the original point that we started with offline just before this call, is I'm amazed. I'm seeing now on radio, hearing on radio, on TV, people who are, no disrespect, intelligent people, respectable people, but scientists, researchers, doctors, senior nurses that never featured on TV before, were never even on social media, are now giving their opinion on the current crisis and are now mini celebrities, influencers. And I'm thinking, where the hell did you pop out from? Where the hell did you come from? And why are you giving your opinion? and giving actually credence to what the government are currently doing, which I cannot believe.
As I was saying before we started recording, the person is irrelevant. What I mean is the individual doctor is irrelevant. It's the global narrative that matters. So the global narrative is simply giving a stage to whichever prostitute of media sensationalization is willing to take it up.
Whoever's trending at the moment.
Or shall we change prostitute of media significance to someone who's simply given respect and a platform who would be otherwise totally ignored?
And would stay at home.
Because doctors who are speaking common sense at the moment and are explaining that masks are irrelevant, and there's plenty of studies to show that they are useless and cause plenty of physical and psychological harm. There are plenty of studies that show that lockdown is not only does it not reduce coronavirus deaths, it potentially will select for more dangerous strains, plus it causes irreparable physical and psychological damage to the human population. None of that is really getting out at all, because that's not part of the global narrative. So the juggernaut is simply having its hangers-on, which are these previously irrelevant scientists. I mean, who had heard of Chris Whitty, for instance? And quite frankly, who really wants to become chief medical officer anyway, unless you're some kind of boffin, which is exactly what he is. He's clearly heavily shifted to the right side, as a lot of professors are. What I mean by that, towards the Asperger's autistic, and you can see it in his total lack of social.
You mean right brain? You mean right-brained as opposed to right-wing thinking, or is that what you're looking to? Is that what you're suggesting?
Just a very good point. No, what I mean is on the emotion autistic spectrum, where.
Sorry, I interrupt. Can you just define what you call by right, so our listeners
absolutely
have some specificity?
The emotion autistic spectrum is something where we're all on automatically, and a typical man is on the right side of a typical woman, because women are on the whole, statistically speaking, it's a scientific fact, if I'm allowed to say that word at the moment, that women are more emotional on the whole, because there are plenty of men who are more emotional than plenty of women, but on the whole, the average woman's more emotional. So women are on the left side of the spectrum, and men tend to be on the right side of the spectrum.
That's because, can I just, sorry, I know I keep interrupting, and I apologize for that.
You do.
Because I just want to get some clarification. So it's because women are more on the nurturing side of things, because that's what they're designed to do. Hence the reason they're more emotionally attached, particularly because of having to deal with children and things like this, or in the past. I mean, obviously,
well, that's right.
The narrative has changed women's behaviour this last few years. I just want to.
Well, that's also why. Well, it's forcing behaviour change, but leaving in its wake lots of dysfunctional, unhappy women. But yes, you're right, because women are generally also more altruistic because they're more agreeable. And why they're more agreeable is because the average woman has far more contact with a baby up to the age of 18 months than the average man. And you can't argue with a baby up to the age of 18 months. You just have to do what it says and attend to its needs. So therefore, women are more agreeable and more nurturing, is whatever word you want to give it. So going back to our point, men are more disagreeable on the whole, and therefore on the extreme right of the spectrum is someone who's just brutally utilitarian and functions in binary thinking, such as an autistic person. And then if you're slightly less that severe, then you're Asperger's. And you can spot these people because they will think very black and white. They panic if they're not in control. They can get quite aggressive if they're not in control. They make you feel that you're an idiot if you don't agree with them, because for them, there is only one truth. There's no gray area. Their eye contact is often a little bit inappropriate, or sometimes too direct, or sometimes just avoidant. And then they will tend to select for various professions which require binary thinking.
Like Professor Whitty.
Well, like researchers who have less contact with patients. Although, of course, there was a celebrated time when he spent Christmas going around the wards. So, I mean, that is a nice thing. Not sure that there's much bedside manner there, but nevertheless, there we are. And then you have computer programmers, software programmers. They are obviously, their entire lives are just zeros and ones and if and but, and if this happens and if that happens. And then you have barristers, because of course barristers don't care about the truth. They just have to apply the law. And in fact, I remember one barrister at the beginning of a case, I heard him over say, are we defending or prosecuting? He didn't care. His job was simply to win the case.
But if we go back to the original conversational point, are we saying that these scientists, I mean, we've created the profile of who they are and why they are the way they are. I'm not comfortable with these scientists having so much influence, or, sorry to be controversial, is the government, in every country, I think it's not just UK, using the scientists as an excuse, but actually they're deciding what they want anyway. And actually we don't really know now what is being advised, because the minutes are no longer being published in these advisory boards or meetings or groups or whatever.
Well, you have Niall Ferguson, who has, as far as I know, managed to have the longest track record of completely wrong predictions, in fact, devastatingly wrong, who still is taken seriously, and who broke his own lockdown rules.
So what was he advising on? SARS, Ebola,
foot and mouth, all catastrophically
the whole lot
wrong.
over the last 12, 15 years. And he's still around.
With his computer models.
And he's still around.
In a different
group, but still there.
That's right. Wow. And then when Sage were forced to publish their minutes during a court trial, bought by a Monaco businessman, they then formed a different scientific committee whose minutes have not been published.
That's not
so in terms of these sort of scientists who seem to be coming out the woodwork, who no one's ever heard of before, it's almost like I'd just like to sort of get some clarity. Would you say that in some ways they've taken advantage of a platform that they wouldn't necessarily have reached to actually give them a lot more visibility, and therefore they're willing to go with what the narrative is? Or do you think some people will stick to their guns? And the other question I want to probably throw out there is, how much is it theory based and how much is it practice based? Or because let's face it, this is the first time we've actually seen something like this, and we know we have people in their laboratories and looking at, finding remedies and finding cures and things like that. But also the other question I want to throw in there for you, so there's three in there, is, isn't it good though to actually have someone in a laboratory who doesn't actually have contact with patients, who applies the content without the emotional attachment? Because let's face it, if science is based on facts, is it therefore not good that they can actually disassociate themselves from dealing with patients as such?
The first question you asked about is it narrative? Are they conforming according to the narrative, or are they speaking as they find? I can tell you my personal response to that would be, the media again are picking and choosing who they want to give the replies or the opinion that they need for that particular program for that particular day. And the scientists that may have an opinion that says lockdown doesn't work, or that actually the vaccination program is this, that, or the other, they're not going to be given airtime. The media are again in control of the narrative. And
of course they are. And you also have things like social media, who are taking down posts from people who say that it's that is fake, or that it's not substantiated, or whatever. So
we got by YouTube, and we were referring to a scientific article published in Nature in June 2020, and of course they weren't interested.
Yeah, but I've got a question for Andy. Do you think any reputable scientist, as in doctor level and above, will ever, on national television, GMTV, BBC, do you think they will go against the government narrative? Bearing in mind they are probably 40s, 50s, they have a career and they want to carry on having a career. Do you think in this current climate they would go against the UK government's narrative?
Well, I can answer that. There are a few, and they're viciously trolled. And your answer about